Hello, everyone. I hope that you are enjoying your adventure into homeschooling this week. We're going to wrap up chapter 13 for this week. So we're going to be talking about the ending of the slave trade in both the United States and Great Britain. But before we talk about when the slave trade ended, we need to talk about when it became profitable. So African slavery became profitable during the Age of Exploration. African slavery became profitable during the Age of Exploration. One more time, you know the way it works. African slavery became profitable during the Age of Exploration. We're going to focus on Great Britain first, and then we'll transition to the United States. So the first group of people to speak out against slavery in both Great Britain and America were the Quakers. The Quakers were the first group to speak out against slavery. Quakers, first group to speak out against slavery. There was actually another name for the Quakers that you also need to make sure you know, and that is the Society of Friends. The Quakers were also known as the Society of Friends. Quakers, first to speak out against slavery, also known as the Society of Friends. So now we're going to talk about John and Charles Wesley. John and Charles Wesley were mentioned in the last section, I believe, and they were the people who started the Methodist Church. And they are another group of people who supported abolition. If you don't know what abolition basically means ending slavery, abolishing slavery. So abolition is the word for getting rid of slavery. Another famous person that we need to talk about in England who worked against slavery was John Newton. John Newton has an interesting story. He was a former slave ship captain, and he got convicted about what he was doing and how he was hurting other human beings, and he ended up speaking out against slavery. That's not the only thing he's famous for. He also is the guy who wrote the hymn, Amazing Grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. So he realized his involvement in the slave trade made him a wretch, a horrible person, and he ended up writing this amazing hymn that we still sing today. So John and Charles Wesley spoke out against slavery. They started the Methodist movement. John Newton was another person who was a former slave ship owner who spoke out against slavery. Another person that you are going to need to know is William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was a member of the British Parliament, and his greatest achievement in life was helping to abolish slavery in England. He actually had a stomach disorder, and he ended up dying before he got to see the abolition of slavery in England. Slavery was finally abolished in England in 1833, just a couple months before William Wilberforce had ended up passing away. So these four people, you need to know who they were and how they ended up helping the end of slavery in Great Britain. There's also another group called the Committee for the Abolition of the Slave Trade, and they were another important group in getting rid of slavery in England. So slavery ended in England in 1833. Slavery ended in England in 1833. Understand this. Slavery ended in the British Empire in 1833. This was 30 years before slavery officially ended in the United States of America. England abolished slavery 30 years before America did. Now, there were a few early opponents to slavery. Some of those people were, again, the Quakers, like we mentioned when we talked about England. Thomas Paine, Jonathan Edwards and his followers, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. So Thomas Paine was a person who wrote a very famous pamphlet around the time of the Revolution it was called Common Sense, and it helped people end up declaring independence against Great Britain. Jonathan Edwards was a pastor during the he was a pastor during the Great Awakening, and he was important for helping to oppose slavery. John Jay was the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and Alexander Hamilton is the guy on your $10 bill. He's also very famous these days because of the musical Hamilton. So, there was a very important provision in the United States Constitution. The United States Constitution said that there could be no laws made about slavery until after January 1st, 1808. And when that time frame ended, then the United States ended up stopping the importation of slavery, which means no new slaves could come into the United States. But that didn't mean that slavery ended. It just meant that there were no new slaves being brought into America. We talked about the invention of the cotton gin, and we talked about that earlier in this chapter. And remember, Eli Whitney created the cotton gin, and before that it took a really long time to get the seeds out of the cotton, so growing cotton wasn't a profitable crop. But after the invention of the cotton gin, suddenly cotton became a crop that everyone wanted to grow, and it became an important cash crop. And with the invention of the cotton gin, it made slavery become profitable. Well, it made slavery last longer in the United States. So make sure you write this down, star it, highlight it, do whatever you need to do. The cotton became profitable because of the cotton gin. Cotton became profitable using slaves after the invention of the cotton gin. So now let's move into two very important people to the abolition of slavery in the United States of America. The first one is William Lloyd Garrison. William Lloyd Garrison was a Northerner, and he published a newspaper called The Liberator. William Lloyd Garrison published The Liberator. It was a newspaper, and it was an abolition newspaper, so he spoke about abolishing slavery. The other important person in America for the abolition of slavery was Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was a former slave. He ran away from his master, and he ended up becoming free because he ran away, and he used his ability to speak out against slavery. So Frederick Douglass, former slave who spoke out against slavery. Frederick Douglass, former slave who spoke out against slavery. And slavery didn't end in America until the end of the Civil War in 1865. Slavery ended in America with the end of the Civil War in 1865. Slavery ended in America in 1865. But just because slavery ended in England and in the United States, that doesn't mean that slavery ended around the world. Slavery is still in existence today. In France, Napoleon revived the practice of slavery. So Napoleon Bonaparte, slavery had kind of gone away in France, and then he brought it back. Haiti, the slaves revolted, and they ended up being able to win freedom. Haiti was controlled by France for a period of time, and so the slaves there revolted and they were able to win their freedom. In Haiti, the slaves revolted and won their freedom. But last, I need you to understand that slavery is still practiced in some Muslim countries even today in the 21st century. Slavery is still practiced in some Muslim countries today. Slavery is still practiced in some Muslim countries today. that's the end of our lecture. There's some other activities to do for this week, and I will see you again soon. Have a great day.